how to turn this into this in 5 super simple and easy steps. Hello everyone, this is Dylan from the Trini Gardener channel, and I'm super excited about this video because we're going to be starting a topic and a series that I'm very passionate about, and that is called composting. Now, in my last video, I showed you how I amended my beds for a new season of planting, and one of the first things that I showed you was that I was adding compost to my beds, to my raised bed, and that sparked obviously questions, but it's not just questions that I were not anticipating. I was expecting those questions because it's going to start a discussion about exactly what is composting. So that's the first thing. Composting itself is a very simple concept. It's a very natural concept. Think about a tree in the forest. It's going to at one day fall over, right, whether natural causes or unnatural causes. And if we leave that tree right there, within a few years, it's going to completely break down, right? And it's going to begin feeding the forest itself, because plants using the rotted form of that tree will begin growing, right? And that happens all the time. It's an endless cycle in any rainforest. The trees, they fall to the ground. So the trees, they fall to the ground, and then they rot, and that rotting creates what we call compost, and that compost allows a lot of organisms to live and releases a lot of the nutrients that is held in those leaves. Now, as gardeners, for the most part, we don't want to wait years to get our compost, so we do 2 different types of composting, which is not on the level of what will happen in a rainforest necessarily, but it follows the same concept. So there is cold composting and hot composting, and today we're going to be talking about hot composting because it's the fastest way of getting ready to use compost. Now, the first important thing about hot composting is the size of your compost bin. Your compost bin has to be a very minimum of 3 feet by 3 feet by 3 feet in terms of the size. If you don't have that size, that 27 square feet, if I'm not mistaken, then you're not going to have enough mass to generate that heat that's needed for a hot compost bin to start going. All right, so again, that is 3 feet across, 3 feet deep, and 3 feet long. Okay, another thing is that it's not super important that you do actually have a bin. You could just do your compost as a heap. All right, but a lot of people like having a bin because it creates a nice separation between the compost and then whatever your yard or wherever you have your compost going. Now, the second thing about hot composting is going to be what exactly you're going to be putting in your compost bin. The main concept to understand is that you have different types of organic matter, and that's anything that used to be alive and now is dead. And you have them divided up into 2 major categories, right? You have your greens and you have your browns. And the combination of these 2 is what you're going to need in your compost bin. Now, there are a bunch of different ratios floating around, 20% green, 80% brown, 80% brown, 20% green. It all gets really confusing, so my advice is just simply aim for half and half. Half brown, half green, and then you're going to be in a good position, because a lot of the things that we consider green will not necessarily be green alone. It will also become brown at some point. For instance, your grass clippings. If you cut grass, right, it's nice and green, and when it's green, it's full of nitrogen. But if you leave that grass on your lawn for, like a week or maybe 10, 15 days, that same grass turns brown. And when it turns brown, it becomes more or less concentrated with carbon. The nitrogen leaves, and then you just have carbon in there. All right, so if you aim for a half and half mix between the greens and the browns, then you're going to be fine. Now, what exactly would be considered primarily greens and what would be considered primarily browns? That's very important. For your browns, you're going to be looking at things like dry grass clippings, all right? Your dry leaves that fall from any kind of tree that you have, and that is brown, that's dried, it's going to be considered a brown. Other things would be things like shredded paper, cardboard. All of those things are considered brown, all right? And that would create a lot of mass if you gather up a lot of the leaves that fall from your trees. There's a lot of organic matter and potential there to be used to create compost and help your garden. On the side of green, you have things like all of your food waste that is vegetable base. All right, so any vegetable that you have in your fridge that that goes bad, you can put that into your compost and it counts as a green. Other things that count as a green would be things like your tea bags. Those are all considered green. Your coffee grounds full of nitrogen, right? That is also considered a green. And things like your animal manure. And yes, animal manure needs to be composted before you use it in your garden. Another thing that counts as a green, and I mean we could play this game all day because the list could be so long, is things like eggshells. And I just want to mention this one because it's a common misconception that you can just crush up eggshells with your hand, throw it in your garden, and all of a sudden you have calcium for your tomatoes and your peppers. It's false, completely false. Okay, that eggshell needs to break down. And yes, if you put it in your garden within about a year, 2 years, 3 years, you could have calcium. But if you put it into your compost pile, within 6 months, you could have calcium to add into your garden. So it's a lot better idea to take your eggshells, wash them out to avoid any chance of salmonella, even though the chances are very tiny, and still crush them to a certain extent, put them into your compost pile, and let that decompose. All right, with the hot composting, you're looking at anywhere between 2 months to 4 months to get your compost done. It takes a bit of practice to really get all of the timings correct and everything that you need to do, but it is worth it. It's worth learning how to do it, because once you know how to do it, you're going to have a life skill that truly can feed yourself and your family for generations. Teach your kids how to do it and teach your grandchildren how to do it as well. Learning how to compost is one of the greatest favors you can do for yourself if you have any intention of gardening. Even if you don't want to garden right now, you're planning to start a garden within a year, 2 years, 3 years, start your compost bin now. And by the time it gets to a year, 2 years, and even more, you will have beautiful compost to have really nice, good, rich plants and beautiful ornamental plants. Now, naturally, there are going to be some things that you don't want to put in your compost heap. That'll be things like dairy, any kind of dairy, whether it be cheese or milk. You don't want to put that into your compost heap. I mentioned about putting eggs. Yes, you can, but don't put the entire egg. Just egg shells is what we want to put into the compost heap. And then things that go through any kind of processed food, like that involves oil or any kind of process, I think is the better rule. So that means nothing that has been cooked at all, you want to put it into your compost heap. That just won't be a good idea. It'll attract the wrong kind of animals into your heap, because I mean, if you have things like rats coming into your heap, then that's a sign that you put something that you shouldn't have put into your compost heap. And you'd be surprised just having somebody make a mistake and put like some bone or whatever into the compost heap. That could really make your compost heap begin to smell, right? A compost heap that's healthy will never have a bad smell at all on it. If your compost heap is smelling terrible, either it needs to flip, or there's some things in there that really shouldn't be in there at all. There is some debate about putting bread into the compost heap. People do put it and it's supposed to count as a brown. I would just say just don't put it, because it still goes through that process of cooking, and it could have oil in it, and then that could attract the wrong kind of fauna into your compost heap. The fourth step with your compost is that you want to keep your compost moist. Now, not soaking wet. If you can squeeze the compost and like more than 3 drops of water runs down your hand, then it's too wet and you need to let it dry out a little bit, and don't put water so much, okay? If you live somewhere where there's a lot of rain, then a good idea would be to cover your compost when there's a lot of rain, just to avoid having too much of moisture in your compost bin. But at the same time, you don't ever want your compost to go dry. If it goes dry, all the bacteria and the beneficial fungi that's in the compost, they won't die, but they will become inactive because they do need moisture to do their work. And the last, but one of the most important steps when it comes to having a hot compost bin, is flipping your compost. Now, it's very important, because a hot compost is using what we call aerobic bacteria. That's what we consider to be the good bacteria that is going to be breaking down your compost fairly quickly. Okay. Now, if you do not flip your compost at least once every week to maybe like 7 days, around 7-8 days is good, right? Probably the maximum. You probably shouldn't be flipping it any less than that. Then you're going to cause your compost bin to go what we call anaerobic, and it's going to create an environment where anaerobic bacteria, what we call the bad bacteria, can come into play, and they will make your compost bin start to stink. It will smell terrible. Your neighbors will be calling the police on you. So keep your compost bin happy by keeping it moist, but also well aerated, and that's going to be by flipping it, taking a shovel and turning it over at least once every 7 days. If you want, you can do it a little bit more, but maybe not every day or every 2 days. Okay, if you want to aim for like between 5 days to 7 days, as if you maybe do your gardening, you work on the week, So maybe on the weekend, maybe Saturday or Sunday, just dedicate one day for the week to flip your compost bin. And within 2 to 3 months, you're going to have beautiful, beautiful compost. And in just 3 to 4 quick months that pass by so quickly, this is the end result right here. An amazing growing medium that doesn't have to just be a growing medium, 100% organic, and you can use it as a fertilizer. You can make compost tea with this. You can do so much with this resource here. It's such a good, cheap, basically free resource that you can make, just your time and your labor. And as you can see, I'm really excited about using compost in the garden. It's something that even if you don't have a garden just yet, if you started a compost pile, a compost heap, you make a compost bin, whatever you can do, and you start composting right now, by the time you're ready to garden, you'd be so thankful that you did this, so that you didn't have to go out and buy, you know, subpar material that comes in bags. This is really the best stuff, because this is, you know, stuff that just recently broke down, right? So full of humus, full of organic life, full of worms as well. It's just such a good all-round resource to have in any organic garden. And again, you don't have to use it just as a growing medium. You can use it as a fertilizer. You never need to worry about this burning your plants. 100% organic will do that, where you never have to worry about chemical burn. That's not something that we have to worry about at all, and it'll keep your plants so happy, so healthy. Remember, if you know someone might be interested in this information, then share this video with them, help them to grow more food for themselves and their family. Remember, as always, this has been Dylan from the Trini Gardener channel, reminding you to get up and get growing, or now, get up and get composting. Take care.